Welcome to the Modern Figures Podcast. I'm Dr. Jeremy Waysome.
I'm Dr. Kyla McMullen.
And we're here with our regular contributor from NC WIT, Dr. Jeffrey Ann Wilder.
Hey, hey.
Hey.
So Modern Figures is a podcast that's elevating the voices of Black women in computing and inspiring the next generation of Black female coders.
Modern Figures is sponsored by NC WIT and IMCS. The Institute for African American Mentoring in Computing Sciences, or IMCS, serves as a national resource for all African Americans in computing, whether they're students or faculty. And some of our goals are to increase the number of African Americans receiving PhDs in computing, to promote and engage students in teaching and training opportunities, and to add more diverse researchers into the advanced technology workforce. And our sister organization, NC WIT, provided funds for this podcast. And I'll let Dr. Jeffrey Ann Wilder tell you more about that.
So NC WIT stands for the National Center for Women in Information Technology. NC WIT is a national nonprofit organization whose mission is very simple. Our goal is to increase the meaningful participation of women and girls in the field of computing. We've been around since 2004, and we currently work with over 1,100 organizations across the country, whether that's corporate organizations, institutions of higher education, K-12 schools and entities, and we really work to unite, convene, and equip our educational community with ways in which to broaden participation of women and girls, and importantly, we do that at the intersections of race, class, gender, color, disability. So when we're talking about increasing the participation of girls, women and girls in computing, it's all girls, making sure that every girl who wants access has access.
That's awesome. So we're back with our guest, Dr. Stacy LeSure, who that is her entire research area, looking at the persistence and opportunities for women of color who are in engineering and computer science. So we're going to continue this conversation.
So we left off kind of talking about putting your life on hold.
Yeah.
And how that was something that you heard in some of the narratives from the research that you're conducting for the NAILA project. And I think it's a good idea for us to talk about what the NAILA project is again, and then kind of go back into the putting your life on hold.
So NAILA project is an NSF-funded project in collaboration with the University of California, Irvine, as well as Heidelberg University. We have Dr. Sharnia Artis, who is at UCI, and Dr. Marjorie Shavers at Heidelberg. And we're really trying to understand the overall experiences of Black women who are in pursuit of PhDs or postdocs in computer science and engineering. Mm-hmm. And we want to better understand how they're persisting so that we can then learn some strategies to share with, advisors, other students, other Black women who may be interested in pursuing this. So we're really trying to better understand what can we do to help us persist without compromising our overall well-being.
And this got real heated towards the end. We were getting real excited about some of the conversation, so we decided we needed more time with Stacy. So thank you, Stacy, for sticking around and giving us the opportunity to continue this dialogue. Yeah. So putting your life on hold. I mean, I gave an example of how people were going on vacations to Europe and buying houses and, getting promotions. And
having kids, all these things.
And I was in grad school, like the whole time. And it's like the same people, not necessarily different people every single time. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah. For sure. We definitely found that to be the case, that they talked about this whole idea. And if you think about the average age even that a lot of these women are finishing up their PhDs, they decide to go into postdocs, you start looking into childbearing age or not, how challenging it is to find a mate. And so like you said in the opening, is don't put your life on hold. How do we do that? How do we help young women understand that you can do all of those things? And how do we help institutions, how do you support those women so they can live? Because you don't want them to have a resentment around the idea that they're pursuing their education or they're going into these fields that require a lot of time if they go into postdoc. So how do we get, number one, for them not to feel as if they have to put their lives on hold, and then organizations, institutions, universities, what have you, to support them as they're doing those things.
Okay, so we talked about trigger moments. This is another one for me. I was 27 when I started my doctoral program at the University of Florida, and finished up 4 years later, right before I turned 31. And the entire time that I was doing my doc program, I just had this singular focus.
Yes.
I'm here to get my PhD. That's it. I mean, I was curving suitors left and right, so to speak. Real talk, true story.
Yes.
And at no point did I think about, giving a relationship any serious thought, having kids. I always thought I can do that later. I always felt like I had to put it on hold because at the forefront needed to be my coursework, my exams, finishing the dissertation, and we talked earlier about how everybody was expecting me to do it. There was so much writing on it that I didn't really think that, I always felt like I could do that later.
Yeah.
And I got the biggest shock of my life. One thing that no one ever talked to me about before I finished my doctorate was how having a doctorate really does isolate you in a different way socially.
Yes.
Yeah.
That I really hadn't anticipated.
Yes.
I mean, people who would have dated me before in my grad program didn't want to have anything to do with me afterwards because I'm Dr. Wilder now.
Yes, that's
And that's such I'm the same person,
Yeah.
but there's that added layer. I mean, we talked earlier about like what it's like to navigate your work balance, but then outside of work, what that means in the community, what that means when you're trying to date, or if you're interested in being partnered or having a mate, what that looks like. And for me, my ex-husband did not have a doctoral degree, nor did I feel like I wanted someone who had one necessarily, but it just really does impact your ability to do that. I ended up getting married at, I think I was 33 when I got married, and 35 when I had my daughter, and 36 when I got divorced, right? All of those things played into the breakup of the marriage, and I just feel thankful that I have a child, right? The thought of having another one, well, that's a different story, along with, getting married again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just reminded me of how just dynamics change from knowing someone. It reminded me of I was at the gym and I have a friend that I used to work out with in the morning, and I guess someone noticed me when I was there and they asked him later oh yeah, what's her name? I want to get to know her. He was like, she has a PhD. Blah, blah, blah. And listen, and the guy was like, oh, never mind. He's like, I don't have anything to offer her.
Wow.
And then he was like, yeah, acting like that, you sure don't.
Oh,
Yeah.
well.
But all that to say, people all of a sudden, their interests change once they have this idea of, okay, you smart, so you must think you smarter than me. You're gonna put me down or whatever. So it's crazy.
Well, okay. I want to tell you guys my story because I think that it's completely different from Jeffrey Ann's.
Okay.
And I don't know where to start. So as a college student, I never wanted to get married. I wasn't one of those people that were like, oh, I'm gonna have this fairy tale wedding and I'm gonna wear this particular style of dress, or I was never that kid either. I would rip the heads off of my Barbie dolls. I would make them look ugly. I was very much like a tomboy, a daddy's girl all the way. It was just me. I was just different. And in college, I had a lot of friends who were dating and, meeting people all the time. And I had a lot of difficulty just being with the engineers. I know I'm wearing a shirt that says Black Nerds Unite, but I am not a nerd and I just didn't fit in with nerds. And so when I would go to conferences and things for engineering, I was already intimidating because I'm an extrovert. I'm very sure of myself. I don't kind of shy away from conversation, and it was intimidating to a lot of guys in engineering. They just either they didn't want to talk to me or they had to exert some type of control in some type of way, right? So I never wanted to be in a relationship with somebody who was an engineer or in computing. I thought they were strange people or they were arrogant, and I just was not about that. So ultimately, I ended up meeting my husband while I was in my junior year of college, and I didn't know, I think at the time we had both just got out of really bad relationships with people, and when we met, we weren't looking, right? it just happened, right? Like it was just like a moment. I saw him, he saw me, and like like it was very much like a ridiculous movie. Like someone could literally write a movie about our
Did you run across the
relationship.
fields with butterflies?
No, but if I told you like the story of how he asked me to start dating him, it's very much one of those types of stories. It's ridiculous, right? So I didn't expect it, but it happened, and we got married while I was in my doctoral program. And he doesn't have a college degree. He is one of the most intelligent people that I've ever met in my lifetime, though. And he's a aircraft rescue firefighter paramedic. Shout out to my husband Rod. What up?
Hey, Rod.
And he didn't understand what I was going through. But in not understanding what I was going through, he was still willing to support me no matter what.
Yeah.
And he was there for me when stuff got really crazy and I wasn't sure of myself, and he was always affirming. And in addition to, you know, my family and the other people around me, he was just another voice that spoke life into my situation. And it was very difficult. Like, I was very depressed. And there was a point where I was like, all right, this degree's not moving forward. This relationship's not moving forward. I'm getting tired of waiting. Because it's been a few years and I don't have a big shiny ring on my finger. And I used to tell him, the longer you wait, the bigger the ring gets. Y'all can't see this ring, but it's quite large. That's how long he waited. And we just celebrated our 3rd wedding anniversary. And honestly, like, I couldn't imagine someone better for me in my life. But I know that that's not everyone's story. I know that, like, people have a very tough time navigating graduate school with a spouse, with someone who they're in a relationship with, because it's rigorous. But if you find the right person, they're not going to put you down. They're going to lift you up, right? And that's who I found.
And I think sometimes too.
I know, I'm crying over here.
I'm not crying, you're crying. I think sometimes too, it's really important, especially as a high achieving Black woman, no matter what you're doing, to find a mate that doesn't feel like they're in competition with you. So for them to know, hey, I'm still this high achiever, but I still need you. Like, me being me does not put you down at all. And I think that's like such an important quality that I didn't realize until, like, I think I was in grad school and I was just a PhD student, but like all of my friends are PhD students. And, you know, there was a situation where, like, the cops came to a party and they were claiming we were doing something that we weren't, and I told the police officer that we weren't. He was like, well, you and all your friends think you have PhDs and you're so much smarter than everybody else. I'm like, it's not even about that. Like, he literally is wrong. Like, we're not doing what he said we're doing. You know he's wrong because you're sitting here. But, you know, that dynamic just pulls itself into the conversation. I'm like, so you were just basically thinking that we think we're smarter than everybody else. Like, this has nothing to do with this situation right here.
Smarting while Black.
Exactly.
Yes.
Smarting while Black.
I mean, there's another one.
Yeah, and it's not
anything.
a competition. Relationships are not competitions. And I think a lot of my friends struggle because you have people who, and I think it's just our culture in general right now, like, we want to be the best at everything. And we always want to put our best selves forward. And that's all we want people to see about us. And that's just not reality. Like, you aren't a perfect person. Nobody on earth is. And if you never let somebody see the pieces of you that are kind of the darkest parts of who you are, they will never fully know you.
Right.
And they can't help you in any way because you are allowing them to.
Yeah.
And as Black women, we're so conditioned to want to do everything ourselves. And if we would just let go of some things, it would make it easier, right?
Yes. But I think that's part of it, you know, as we are talking, we don't know how to separate things, right?
Yeah.
And so this, all that we're going through at work and or in school, we have to be this super strong Black woman, right? And so when we get home, we don't know how to take that hat off. And if we can learn how to do that, the earlier the better. And also this idea of a perfect mate, and he has to have this degree or this, we got to let that go.
Yes.
And I love a song by Jill Scott, We Need You,
Yes.
right? And so they need to understand understand that we need them. And a lot of times because we can't show that side, and that's why that code switching thing is so dangerous.
Yeah.
Because if you are constantly trying to figure out, if you just remain who you are all the time, you can have both. But if I'm like, okay, where am I now? Am I Superwoman now, or my wife, or my girlfriend,
or
right?
mommy,
right? So leave the Superwoman cape sitting down somewhere and just be who you are. And I think that would help a lot with these relationships, because that's real. It's a real thing, right? Yeah.
So I think we got to a place where we can all agree that it's possible to find love. It's just we got to stop kind of putting ourselves in these silos where it has to be this certain type of person, or like we have to present ourselves a certain type of way to find a mate. And I don't even know. So I'm one of those people who are a firm believer of, as a woman, I'm not looking for you.
Right.
Oh yeah, no.
You gonna find me.
I think of it like a double dutch. Like, I am the ropes, and you need to get in where you fit in. Double dutch don't come looking for you.
I love it.
Yes.
But I do think, like, in terms of just our existence in computing or in engineering more broadly, like, there are some unique things about being Black and being a woman and having to juggle both of those things at the same time. And also, like, just, we're not just Black and a woman. We are more than that, right? Intersectionality involves all aspects of your life.
Yeah.
Right? And I like to lean towards more like womanist theory, where you bring to the table your whole self, not just your gender.
Right.
It's your faith, it's your disability status, it's, are you a parent, are you not? Like, there are so many aspects about who we are and how we were raised that we bring to our classrooms, to our labs, to to class as students. And we need to be able to honor all of those pieces of ourselves in the same way, like, that we would present them in a relationship with our colleagues. We need to be able to be our whole selves. And I don't know how, it's hard to do that. It's very hard to do that.
It takes a lot of courage, I think.
It does, courage. There's an activity I do in one of my workshops. It's about diversity beyond gender and race. And so what I ask the participants to do, and typically it's a college students, graduate students, so write down 3 of your identities, whatever they are. You can choose, and I go through the list. It can be wife, mother, what have you. It doesn't have to be I'm Black, I'm female, what have you. And then I ask them to choose one of those identities they identify with the most, one that they admire the most, and then a stereotype about that identity that's not true. That they don't have that particular stereotype. And it's really interesting. What I find is when they do those types of things, it forces them to think beyond just gender and race, number one. But what I have found very interesting is when they select the one they admire the most, sometimes it's ones that people may consider that's a part of their identity that they're uncomfortable with. Let me give you an example. Like one time, a gay white male, that's how he identified, right? He said, those are my 3 identities. He said being gay is the one I admire most. And he talked about how the different things he had to overcome in order to, how he had to be strong, right? Because that was one that forced him to be able to deal with the discrimination or what have you, right? And so a lot of times people may think that's one that person may be ashamed of. And so we maybe are judging them based on that in a way, or we're worried about how do we make that person feel comfortable around that identity. And this is actually one I admire about myself the most. And I think if we can start to do those types of things and say this is a part of my identity, and like you said, bring your whole self to the table, and stop trying to be in these separate boxes, and we have to identify with that, which most people will identify with us as. Like they see me first as a Black woman, whereas there's something else that may stand out most, right? But you're right, bring your complete self to the table. It's so important.
And there's just so many differences between all of us, right? Like, just because we're both Black women or all Black women, it doesn't mean that our experiences are anything alike.
Exactly.
Right. I was gonna say too, like, with bringing your whole self to the table, don't be afraid to say the word black. Like, I've been in mixed company, like, black is not a bad word.
Yeah.
People will, like, let's say, oh, someone walks in, like, oh, there's an older gentleman looking for you. They'll describe everything about him
Yes.
except the fact that he was black. Like, people act like they're afraid to say the word black.
Exactly.
And it's not a bad thing. Like, I'm proud to be black.
That's
like,
the
I don't
whole-
want to be
yeah.
nobody else.
Yeah.
Or
That's the
you're a
whole idea.
magical black girl.
I'm a magical black girl.
Yeah.
Shout out to my girl Evelyn.
And that's the whole idea when I said, pick your identities, because identities that you identify with and that you're most proud of. So when I do workshops as well, I say, don't feel sorry for me because I'm a black woman. I love being a black woman. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change anything about it.
That's right.
And a lot of times people think, oh, we don't want her to feel too black. You know what I'm saying? It's like I feel too black already.
Right.
You know?
How does that work?
Yeah.
Too black.
I feel too black today. Like, that doesn't even make sense.
It's your hair, child. Full
Yes, they
circle.
do everything they can to try to not identify with, they don't want to say anything about, that. And I talked about how, too, when you travel abroad and people who are not familiar with seeing black people, particularly black women in our wonderful ways we may wear our hair, there's a curiosity. And because they don't have the same history as this country, they ask questions and they're not afraid. They don't think that you have some sort of negative connotation about who you are. And in this country, people are more reluctant to ask questions or be curious because they think it's offensive. When that's the part of me that I love the most.
Yeah.
Right, and I like the fact that you ask questions. Like, I will explain it to you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually do appreciate when someone doesn't reach out and try to touch my hair.
I had a friend in grad school where, like, I had my hair, like, in a puff, and so, like, the puff was just too tight, and so I just took the band off of it, but my hair didn't move. And but I was doing this, like, in conversation, not even thinking, but I was like, whoa, how did your hair do that? And I was like, wow, and I, like, used this analogy of, like, just trying to explain to him, like, I was like, okay, imagine a bunch of curly telephone cords.
What?
And, like, and imagine this, and he's like, oh my gosh, do that again, like, but just the fact that he had this curiosity about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like a, hey, you're a pet, I'm gonna touch your hair. It's just like, whoa, that was really cool. How does this happen?
In an episode of How to Get Away with Murder right now, this past season, there's a scene where Viola Davis has to dodge, a white female who's trying to touch her hair.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure that every black woman who saw that episode was like, yep.
Yep. There's a collective sigh, like,
Yeah.
again.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's real life. I think for me, like, my hair is such an important part of who I am. It's like a crown on my head. And I want people to, like, recognize me, even though I change my hair a lot. Even though I haven't changed it yet on this podcast. It's happening, people. Like, it's gonna happen.
It will happen.
But I remember being the only one in my research group, the only black female American, the only so many things,
Right.
and being honored, like not having to deal with these issues where people are trying to grab me and touch me like I'm like some type of trophy or something.
Right.
Like it was really them being truly inquisitive, but I wish I didn't have to have those experiences all the time. I wish like I could just come to my lab and have someone be like, "Ooh, girl, your hair looks great today." Like,
Yeah.
where'd you get your hair done? Or like, how did they do that? And all of that has to do with like, I was the only one. I never had the chance to do that unless it was with like someone else in a different department entirely on campus, or
Yeah.
within spaces that I felt safe in. And so I know that everyone deals with isolation differently. And Stacy, we talked about like the isolation that students have in one of the narratives that you read even. But I wonder like what are some strategies that you've seen students use to counteract the isolation that exists within engineering and computing?
Yeah, one of the things is finding a community outside of engineering and computer science. It may be an office of minority education or even the financial aid office. A lot of times you'll find, black people working in the financial aid office, and those people can become your someone you can go vent to. But to really go outside, get outside more. We have a tendency to stay in our labs so much and work again because we're so hyper-focused. but to build a support system, but outside the school. But also what I would recommend at this point, and I heard this from some of the students too, is that we have to learn to maybe do things we don't want to do sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really helping us to grow. It's not about bending or code switching. It's really about self-development and being so comfortable in your own skin that you can show up as you are and see it as a learning experience. I'm going to get to know other people. And what I find is that if I'm comfortable and confident who I am, then people are okay with that because they see that I'm comfortable, so they're not so uncomfortable. And I think a lot of times if we can just start to really realize and accept that we can really show up just as we are, and we can do things that are different even though we may not be accustomed to doing those things. That can help with the isolation, because I think that sometimes people are afraid to interact with us because they don't quite know how we're going to respond. And if we are uncomfortable all the time, they really don't know how we're going to respond. Or if we're not true to ourselves all the time and authentic, they don't know how to respond. So I think part of it is just really getting to a place where you can authentically be yourself at all times and show up, you know, and get to and look at it from a standpoint of curiosity. I'm curious to learn about other people, and don't see it as I'm being forced to assimilate, because you don't have to assimilate, right? And I think that's a new take. If 20 years ago, the advice I would have given myself, it would have been to do that. Yeah.
I love that. That mirrors my experience so much. So I'll share personal and then professional. So when I was a doctoral student at University of Florida, there weren't very many people of color in my department, but I essentially lived in the Office of Graduate Minority Programs, and that's where I found my community. That's where I found my family.
It's now called the Office of Graduate Diversity Initiatives, if you decide to go look for that.
Okay, the Office of Graduate, is it still in Grinter Hall?
It sure is.
I worked there. They paid me. They fed me. They gave me money at the end of my. I remember getting some fellowship money at the very end of. I graduated in August of 2008, but I defended in May. So that summer I didn't have any funding because I was technically defended and whatnot. So they stepped in and gave me some fellowship money for that summer.
That's amazing.
It really was amazing. I mean, I really think so fondly of my doctoral experience because I was around so many other people of color from a variety of disciplines who were supporting each other. We were thriving and we were accomplishing our goals, and the thought of like not finishing never really entered my mind, not seriously, right? Because I knew I had so much support and encouragement. When I went into my tenure track position at my university, I was the only person of color in my department I was there for 10 years. I was the only person of color for 8 years. It was very, very hard. It was a lot more difficult. There was no Office of Graduate Minority anything. There was no Office of Minority anything. It was difficult. And when you become a professor, we talked about before how the bar is higher. They set the bar higher. And you don't have as much room to talk, break silence. So I spent a lot of my first years quiet. Not being able to share my story, and then ultimately I shared my story with the entire university. But I do think it's very important for people to feel okay. For a long time I didn't feel okay just being who I was. And now that I'm in a different professional capacity working for NC WIT, I'll speak a little bit about the things that NC WIT does to help people be who they are. And that's through really something very simple like resources. So we create and develop all these different kinds of resources, from small reports to little factoids to one-pagers on things like this. And NC WIT has a huge focus on intersectionality and social justice. And I think that's really important. And for me, even though there aren't, there isn't necessarily a critical mass of women of color there, that I'm able to work on projects like this and able to be who I am, and it's very much welcome. So that's a good thing.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Through IMCS, we've created the IMCS guidelines, those guidelines are currently developed for departments and faculty to help support underrepresented students in their labs or in their departments. And so we're creating products too to try to help people who may not look like us or may not understand how to support people who don't look like them in their labs, arming them with information so that they can be better mentors and better support people.
And not just information, as well as a relationship.
Yes.
Because they can, we're trying to begin a program where people can almost consult us for like, hey, what do we need to do? How do we get this going? You may not know all the research and all the right words to say, but here are some practical things that you can do from the day to day to, increase the number of people. Because recruitment's one thing, but retention, once they get there,
totally different.
Making sure the climate's good and it's not toxic, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, I recently attended the Institute for Teaching, or the Institute on Teaching and Mentoring by SREB, which is the Southern Regional Education Board. They do this every year. It's a phenomenal conference, and one of the things that I really took away from that, the conversations that we had there, was we have to stop just saying recruit.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing just to get students there. It's another thing to keep students there and help them graduate, right? So we need to look at how we recruit and retain students.
Right.
Because retention is really our problem.
Yeah.
We get a lot of graduate students.
Yeah, we get a lot, but keeping them here, and it kind of ties back into all the things we've been talking about, like isolation, because I feel like when people feel like they're not part of the crowd, then they sort of withdraw and step away from everyone. So of course you'll be isolated, but, having this sense of belonging, like everyone deserves to be here.
I made, when I was in my first year of my doctoral program, I was approached by different graduate students who participated in a summer program with me, and they were like, Jeremy, you know people here, and we want you to create something for us. And these were all engineering graduate students. We have a very strong Black Graduate Student Association, but we don't want to do what they're doing. We want to develop the skills that we need in engineering that are relevant to us if we want to go into academia or industry. So this is your new job for us. Like, how about we identify all of the Black students who are currently in engineering or computing related degree programs, and we just all come together and figure out what we need to be successful. And it turned into something wonderful. Yeah. So we now have a grad group that's a component of our National Society of Black Engineers organization on campus. And we have opportunities for students to just vent. We have professional development. We invite speakers from across the country. We now have a series where they're doing jobs outside of academia in particular, so bringing in invited guests and speakers to talk about how they're using their doctoral degrees outside of industry and in the traditional, or outside of academia, which is kind of the traditional track for most PhDs. And it's been really cool to see it grow, and we've gotten contacted by other institutions to try to create the same thing. A Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers is doing the same, but at a predominantly white campus, you might be the only.
Right.
And if that's the case, there are other Black people on your campus somewhere. They have to be there somewhere.
Yeah, just because
right?
you don't see them in your program doesn't mean, I guess that's, that's it. Like, we had something very similar to your, to Grad NSB. It was called SMESG, the Society of Minority Engineers and Graduate Students. Mm-hmm. And same sort of thing. I think I might have been president twice, or vice president and then president, I don't know, but same sort of thing, because we were both very outgoing, and I remember just tapping people like, you're Black,
right, come to this meeting, we'll feed you.
Right. But even if let's say you're at a university where there just is not a critical mass, one thing that helped me was that I developed Black friends that were outside of the school.
Yeah.
So I was in a college town, but Detroit was nearby. So I remember one day very vividly wondering, because I love to dance, and there was a ballroom dancing class. And I'm like, I don't have a partner, but I wonder about it. And then the lights went out, and that was like the last thing I remembered reading about. Like, you know, it was a storm. The storm was going on, and the lights went out. And I was like, man, I'm not going to just sit in the house in the dark. Let me just go to this event that I literally was just reading about before the lights went out. I went and, you know, just became part of this Detroit ballroom dancing, you know, sort of group.
And I'm sure that was full of black people.
Oh, yes.
Were you
I did learn to step, but
Okay.
Detroit has its own version called ballroom. But like just from doing that, like I met some awesome people who, you know, we would go to Detroit, we would go to different places, we'd meet up with them, and they had nothing to do with school. And it felt so good to just talk to people about things that had nothing to do with the university, with being stressed. Even other grad students can stress you out because you know they might be on 10, and you're like, you know what, I'm trying to decompress right now, and you're on 100.
Like, this is too much energy for me. I don't
Can you
need
bring this down? I mean, I like hearing about other people's thing. Like, oh, like I have a friend and her son was so funny, and he would just, you know, come home with like little funny stories. But just having that other outlet to remind you you're a person. Like, interact with people who are in the community that have nothing to do with your university.
Go to church.
Right, go to church.
You know, going back to the study, that's a strategy that a lot of the women who are persistent said that they're doing those sorts of things. If it's volunteering at the church, if it's doing these social activities. The other thing that we are finding in our study is that as we're asking women questions about their experiences and what it's like to be a black woman, they can tell you, and they describe it. There's a lot of, you can almost feel the sadness, you know, you can feel it, the energy that they have. And then when you ask them about their research, they lighten up. And not only that, what we are finding is that they're not giving themselves enough credit for how great their research is. And so one of the strategies that I'm hoping to figure out some way to word this, but basically focus on the research. Because there's someone else in your department or someone else on your campus that has research similar to yours. And so, and I know that's easier said than done. I've been there. But what I'm saying is what you focus on expands. And so if I'm constantly focusing on my isolation, on being different, I'm going to get more of that. But if I focus on how fabulous I am as a researcher, and again, these are alternative identities to being a black woman. I am a researcher. Maybe I'm a researcher first today. And if we start to do that, I think that can just that can lower some of the barriers. We can have control over lowering that barrier opposed to asking someone else to lower it for us. You know what I'm saying?
So I'm going to insert one story here, which I think is really, really sort of drives home exactly what you're saying and talks about why this podcast is so important, why broadening black women's participation in computing and STEM in general is really important. So my dissertation research was on the issue of colorism. For those who may be listening who don't know what colorism is, it's the light skin, dark skin thing, right? Everybody knows what that is. I've been studying colorism for 20 plus years. I completed undergraduate research on colorism. Then when I went to my master's program, I was very excited about my research. So I went to the graduate advisor, who was a non-woman of color, sociologist, and, you know, I practically burst in her door and said, I already know what I'm doing my master's thesis on. I'm doing the issue of colorism. She stops me and she says, well, that's not sociological. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, well, that's a really interesting issue, but that's a psychological issue.
Excuse me?
And I said, but W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the colortocracy, and W.E.B. Du Bois was a sociologist, so yes, of course it's sociological. And here are all these other studies of sociologists in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, Drake and Caton and E. Franklin Frazier and all these folks who studied colorism, and that professor had never heard of any of that stuff. And because she didn't know, she told me I could not do colorism. Even though I had proved to her in that moment that colorism was sociological, she said, well, you can't do that. You can't research that.
Wow.
And at that moment, I knew, okay, two things. One, I'm going to complete my study on colorism, but I can't do it here.
Oh, I was about to say.
So I had to leave.
You can't be my advisor.
Right.
Well, right. So I ended up doing my master's there. It was a terminal master's program. I did my master's on Norplant at the time, which is really big. I finished my master's degree in like 2001, I think, or 2002. Norplant as a modern day form of eugenics. But then I transferred to the University of Florida to do my doctorate in sociology, and here we fast forward to, you know, I'm in my advisor's office. I'm going to do my research on colorism. This woman who's Dominican was like, oh my gosh, this is so
Yep.
exciting.
Yep.
Let me tell you my experience
Yep.
about colorism in the Dominican
Wow.
Republic. And that was it.
Yeah.
That shows how important it is to have people who look like us encouraging us and encouraging our research and encouraging us as researchers, regardless of the discipline, because it's extremely important.
It really is.
And I've seen that across disciplines, like people who want to focus on something that has a cultural component or something that's not mainstream, and that being brought down and saying, oh, that's not scholarly, that's not
Right.
worth studying. And it's across the board. I won't bring up the person I was speaking with yesterday, but they're in a whole nother venue, and I'm like, really, this is happening? You too? Like even with computer science, doing things with cultural computing or human-centered computing, people think, oh, well, that's not really computer science. It's just like, maybe they think you're just shuffling papers or something and not really doing research. But it's so crazy how anything that has to do with culture or being, you know, some sort of intersectional identity is thought of as less, even when there's just as much research there. Just because people aren't regarding it as important and there isn't enough stuff on it doesn't mean that it's less than.
Well, I'm gonna scratch the cultural part because there are some things about our society that we really like lean into culture. I'm gonna replace that with black women.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I was trying to be PC. I'm sorry. Black women.
I mean, when it comes to research on us, right, deeming what's valuable, like, you know, what's scientific really,
Yeah.
right? Our experience is, of course, valid and scientific and worthy of being studied.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And in addition to being able to talk about those things, when you mention, you know, our research and being passionate about our research, one of the things that we suggest in the guidelines is that you should offer students the opportunity to go to affinity conferences and events, and it will allow them to present their research, but also have an audience of people who are supportive, who understand them, and potentially are also doing similar work,
Right,
yeah.
right? And they can build their network from going to those conferences in addition to the ones that are related to their technical field. Affinity conferences offer you so much
Yes.
in terms of affirmation that you don't get otherwise, or you may not get otherwise on your campus as a black woman.
Yeah, and for affinity conferences, like my own story, I, as a grad student, went to my first conference, you know, Black People in Computing. That was the name of it, but basically that's what I'm calling it. But my first publication literally came from a conversation we had in the hallway about, hey, I think this is important. I want to study this. And hey, I think it's important too. And 5 of us basically said, we're going to research this, we're going to write a paper, and we're going to submit it. And my first publication was with a bunch of black women who we all decided, like my advisor didn't think that I was ready to publish. And I was like, well, I'm published because I heard publish, you know, publish or perish,
Yep.
papers are currency, you ain't about
Yep.
to hold me back. I didn't say it to his face, I said it when he closed the door, but still. You know, I published this thing, and it just felt amazing to just, we would be on these conference calls, because mind you, we're all isolated
Yeah.
at our own places, but every week or maybe twice a week, we would have these conference calls, we would talk, we would say, okay, you're going to do this part, you're going to do this part, and I was able to learn the research process in a very safe environment where I didn't have to worry, oh, am I good enough, is this good enough, are they scrutinizing me, is my hair wrong today, you know,
Right.
all this
Carla,
stuff.
that is my exact story too. And
Wow.
I'm not even joking. And in a completely different space, you know? So, like,
Wow.
my first publication is in engineering education.
Oh, yeah.
And my degree is in civil engineering.
Yeah.
But I want to do engineering education research. And I was talking to a friend about, you know, issues of intersectionality. And she was like, I've just been thinking about all these things and womanist theory. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And she was like, it's not feminism. And, you know, and she was like, I have so many friends who are getting their PhDs or have received their PhDs in engineering. I'm going to gather all of us together and we're going to do something. We're going to figure out what we're passionate about and we're going to make a publication.
Wow.
And we did. And I mean, it really is affirming when you're not making progress in your work.
Right.
As a graduate student, you feel like something's wrong with you. Like, why can't I do the things that the other students are doing? And especially if you're the only one, you know, it makes you feel like you are deficient in some type of way. But that type of experience will change your life. Like,
Yeah.
it will make you a believer in yourself.
Yes.
And in all black women, I mean, to be completely honest, like, we are capable, we're here, we can do anything that we put our minds to, even if it's completely irrelevant to the work that you ultimately want to do.
And along those lines, I mean, the Naila Project was born that exact same way. People we had met at conferences.
Wow.
And we talked about how, as you mentioned, Jeffrey, and there's not enough research about us as black women, and we sat around and said, they're not studying us. There's no, and so even when we were writing the proposal, we had a hard time in the literature trying to find things. And so we did the same thing, conference calls, we wrote the proposal that way, and it was funded. And again, we're focusing on the research, and for professors, that's currency, having a proposal, having money come in. And so it's hard to balance the disciplinary research as well as these types of things, but it does give you some sort of affirmation that is worth it, right? So those are some suggestions. Again, that's why I say focus on, the research more than some of the other things.
So that's why it's like so crazy to me that with affinity conferences, people ask like, oh, why do we need to have a specific conference for this subgroup? Like Stacy, like recently you said you were in the gym with your Nesbitt shirt, National Society of Blacks in Computing, and someone was asking you, if someone was asking you like, why is this group needed?
Exactly, and that's such a complicated question to even begin to answer. And it's like if you have to ask me that question, you clearly do not get it. But the response to that really is everything about this world supports who you are. This happened to be an Indian man, but still, you have so many affirmations that being of a certain nationality or gender, that this is normal for you, and so everything in society sort of supports your vision of what it is that you want to do. And as black women in particular, we have to find ways to help, like the whole conversation we have around affirmations and belongingness. I mean, we have to create those types of things. They don't automatically exist for us.
Absolutely.
So before we go, Stacy, you have a book
Yes.
that we want to shout out, and it's titled Stories of Resilience in Engineering, Black Women Threatened by Stereotypes, Thriving to Destiny. Stories of Resilience. I feel like that's been our theme.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm so honored that you shared your full story with us, because it's so important. I'm becoming really passionate about storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lost art that we need to get back, because that's just how we communicated before we ended up being on ships. And then again, as we tried to maintain who we were, in the midst of some of the worst atrocities to ever occur on this earth. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's been wonderful.
So awesome today.
Yes, excellent.
Until next time.
Drink some water, eat some vegetables, and be extra.